A singularity has no business model. No major power group in our society is interested in provoking one. Nobody who matters sees any reason to create one. There's no there. Bruce Sterling recently wrote that, and it provoked a lot of controversy. Now, I'd say rejuvenation and reversing aging does not fit the narrow definition of singularity, but it does have a common problem. There's no business model. It's scientifically achievable. I think most of us believe that. But getting there in practice might take a shift even in our thinking. So I'd like to talk about business models and investment strategies and durable businesses and how I think durable businesses are the best way for us to fight aging. And by doing that, I'll allude frequently to Mithril's investing philosophy because it is focused on, as our managing general partner Jay Royan says, finding transformative and durable technology businesses. We like to focus on businesses that can make a big impact. And often, technology can make the biggest impact in areas that have stagnated, in areas that are long overdue for innovation, areas like transportation, areas like farming, areas like healthcare. And I would say the pharma industry's approach to aging certainly counts as long overdue for innovation. Think about it. Developing a new drug requires massive patience, both mental and financial, long lead times, immense regulatory controls, investment costs that double every few years. And in the context of age-related diseases, often a limited impact on the overall economic and social burden. Mithril invests in a wide variety of tech sectors that we find to be places for transformative and durable companies. I'll just give one non-healthcare example first. We just invested last week in Helion, a fusion power company whose power plant prototypes are already generating deuterium-deuterium fusion at a small scale. This company, fusion has been an idea for probably more than 40 years. It's never quite become economical. But recent advancements in high-power electronics developed for space propulsion and the smart grid have enabled Helion to take a new approach to fusion that we're very optimistic about. So that is one area that is ripe for change. People think that the best power sources in the future will be either natural gas or wind and solar, but I think fusion has a much greater potential. We invest on the basis of team and technology. That alone is not unusual, but our particular approach is. On team, we focus on culture, a rational plan, and long-term relationships. And on technology, we like breakthrough technology, not just because of its potential to create a monopoly, although that's nice, but also its potential to transform entire industries and to transform our quality of life for the better. Not to add incrementally, not to change things just for the sake of changing the economics of an industry, but to actually, in many cases, create an entire new industry. As Ajay says, we invest with conviction, and then we concentrate into our best investments over time. Each investment represents a transformative potential, and we also expect that transformative potential to be reflected in its potential value, both its economic value and its social value, which ideally are the same thing. What does that mean? That means actually that the best science project is a profitable company. My partner Peter Thiel and my colleague Blake Masters have written a book about how to found a company. It'll be published next month by Crown. It's called 0 to 1, and I highly recommend it. And I'd like to talk about a couple of ideas that Peter and Blake explain really well in the book. The first is the difference between intensive growth and extensive growth. And you can see this difference in philanthropy as well as in economics. Let me start with philanthropy. There are two ways to grow. Extensive growth means making copies of great things so that more people can share in it. So adding another check and piling it on top of the local art museum is a worthy form of philanthropy, but it's not creating anything new. But taking a very small amount of money and creating a huge amount of change in our culture and in our science, as the Thiel Foundation does, is creating something new. And that is intensive growth, or intensive philanthropy. On the economic side, you can see the same dichotomy. Growing by copying things that already exist, as China is doing, is important. It allows the entire world to share in the current state of technology. That's extensive growth. But creating something new, as a lot of tech innovators, as a lot of people in this room do, is intensive growth. And that, I would argue, takes you not from something to more copies of it, from 1 to n, but actually from 0 to 1, from nothing to something important. And that's the source of the title of this book. Another theme is what we call the power law of venture capital. So before I got involved in venture capital, I thought the general idea was you bet on a lot of things, and you try to mitigate your risks, and you hope that everything sort of works out a little bit. That's actually not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to make sure that everything you invest in has the potential, in a plausible state of the world, to not only dominate an industry, to earn back the entire fund. In other words, your best investment, looking backwards, will be worth more than all the other investments put together. There's a steep curve. And that means that at the time you're making the investment, every single investment you make, you shouldn't aim for a solid, safe 2x return. Every single investment you make has to have a very plausible chance to actually be better than everything else. Some of the guiding principles that I've been talking about would seem to make biotechnology a good fit for investment. Like software, biotech is in a sense scalable. Huge initial costs, the entry fees in terms of testing and approvals, but once you're there, incremental costs are basically zero. Printing out another copy of a pill is basically free, just like printing out another copy of your software. Proprietary technology can establish a monopoly position. Even regulatory hurdles, while they create huge barriers to entry, can actually help you sustain a monopoly if you get over the hurdle. So when I worked at HHS, my friends over at FDA would come to me if they wanted to issue a new regulation. And they sort of got to know what my views were over time. And so after a while, they started coming to me and saying, industry wants this. Because they thought, well, he's a Republican, therefore he's pro-industry. Therefore, if we say industry wants this, he'll do it, because he thinks industry good, government bad. So I could see why they thought that. That is how I used to think. But after going through this a few times, I started pushing back and saying, when you say industry wants this, do you mean that the 5 undiscovered scientists that are working in a garage trying to create a much more efficient version of some billion-dollar pill that has huge side effects? Are you saying that they want this new regulation added on top of their barriers to entry? Or are you saying that the most politically connected, huge, crony capitalist companies in the world want this? So they stopped asking that question. But there are a lot of factors that can help create a sustainable business, a durable business in healthcare, such as better technology. Think of Fresenius, better business models. Think of Kaiser, better risk management. In every case, a combination of technology and finance and macroeconomic understanding and a business model can yield a long-term winner. That's the potential to create a huge impact. And that all adds up to durability. Let me give you a couple of examples of where combining a few important things can make a big difference. Let me talk first about the convergence of nanotech and biology. So Mithril recently invested in a nanotech company called Magforce that combines nanotechnology with biology. So they create iron oxide nanoparticles with an aminosilane coating that they inject into solid cancer tumors, and then in a series of non-invasive sessions, activate them with an external electromagnet that causes the particles to heat up and ablate the tumor. They're already approved for glioblastoma in Europe, and they're now working on developing a prostate cancer indication. Glioblastoma is important because there are really no good treatments at all. Prostate cancer is important because there are a lot of treatments, and they all have significant costs and side effects. Another example I'd like to talk about, we funded this one through Breakout Labs, is ImmuSoft. I think Matthew's actually here. So ImmuSoft is combining software with biology. They are programming human cells, immune cells, in order to produce therapeutics in the body. And they've already demonstrated the production of an enzyme to treat a significant disease. Ask Matthew if you want to know what it is. I'm not sure if it's public or not. Bell Biosystems, I think Dan is also here. Another really promising company that we funded through Breakout Labs. So they represent the convergence of synthetic biology and regenerative medicine. They are creating biologically inspired tools to accelerate preclinical research and development by pioneering the use of synthetic organelles that can add new function to cells. And their first product is a magnetic organelle called a manganelle. Then let's talk about the convergence of, sorry, I don't have a slide for this one. The convergence of biology and cryonics. A great example, also a Breakout Lab company, is Arigos Biomedical, which is developing high-speed cooling methods for reversible organ and whole organism cryopreservation, which could be very important in making organ transplantation much more significant and also in aiding cryonics. Yeah, I don't have a slide for that one. Mithril has recently invested in several other very interesting healthcare companies that we'll be announcing early in the fall. What's preventing more investment? Let's discuss that. I think there is optimism and there is appreciation of the field, but there are still some barriers to investing in biotechnology. And we learned a lot about one of them when we helped Lindy launch Breakout Labs 3 years ago. So the idea of Breakout Labs was to bridge a funding gap in science. It's to take radical new science ideas that are promising, of which there are thousands, probably most people in this room have one, but they're kind of stuck at a lab bench with one scientist who thinks it's important and no way to develop it enough even to show to an early stage venture capitalist or an angel investor. We thought, we had an intuition, we had a sense that there are a lot of these ideas out there, including in life extension, and we wanted to bridge the gap. So there's probably a lot of people who are nearing their PhD, and they have a great life extension idea or a great physics idea, but it's so high risk that they're going to put it on the back burner and just go to some corporate science job. So we created Breakout Labs to bridge this funding gap, to provide funding for very, very early stage radical science proto companies. Give them just enough funding to, in about a year and a half, achieve a few milestones and have something to show to normal investors. And we found, we put it open to open application on the web, any kind of science, physics, materials. And what did we find? By far, the largest number of great promising ideas were in healthcare. That suggests to me that the biggest pain point in all science funding is in bio. It's good that we identified that. We're trying to make a difference. I think we've drawn other people's attention to this gap. This gap in funding is really a potential for funders. If you can redirect more money away from, say, real estate investing or even software investing and into radical bio investing, you can make a big difference and probably a good return. These kinds of biotech startups are examples of what Peter would call extreme examples of indefinite thinking. You might note that a lot of the investments I just cited are not in drug development. The regulatory hurdles are much lower in devices than in drug development, and that's why we don't invest in molecules, we invest in platforms. When Eli Lilly noted in 2012 that the cost of drug development had crossed $1.3 billion, they did have their critics. A lot of people scoffed. Forbes writer Matt Herper said, "This is of course ludicrous." And then he went on to say that the real average cost was about $4 billion. Moore's law governs computer hardware. It points out the rate at which the power and cost of computer chips improve over time. But biotech has the opposite, what we call Eroom's law, where the number of drug products you get for $1 billion gets cut in half every few years. This is a chart from Peter and Blake's book, comparing biotech startups to software startups. So on the top row, you have, on the bio side, you have uncontrollable organisms, and software, you have determinate code. This is showing why it's harder to invest in biotech. And in terms of environment, you have naturally and poorly understood things in bio versus very well understood controllable things in your environment in software. The approach in biotech is indefinite and random. In software, it's very definite. There are some occasional, there are of course bugs that have to be worked out, but you you can define them well and get rid of them. In regulation, biotech is heavily regulated, as I was saying earlier. Software is completely unregulated. That's why it's achieved so much more in the past few decades than bio. And bio is extremely expensive. As I said, the cost to develop a drug is more than $1 billion and more than a decade. Software is very, very cheap. And the difference in team is different as well. Bio people cost a lot more. It's not all bad news. This community, this rejuvenation biotechnology approach may be able to counteract some of these barriers. Let me talk about a couple of those. First, by looking at the underlying causes of aging and trying to intervene at the stage of repair or reconstitution of normal function, the field may be sidestepping some of the problems of a poorly understood environment and uncontrollable subject. If there are underlying causes, if the removal can in some case impact multiple conditions, if there may be circumstances where early and broad application could prevent or reverse age-related disease, long-term maintenance rather than disease interventions, this problem could be easier than a lot of people think. I'm not really a scientist, but my sense is that stopping the accrual of damage from metabolism without stopping the metabolism itself might be hard, might be impossible, but the regenerative medicine approach, restoration of body function could end up significantly easier. At least a more definite approach than much of drug discovery. However, the biggest secret of rejuvenation might be in its inherent solution to Eroom's law. There's a lot of talk about streamlining, licensing, and drug development and reducing time and costs. This was a big interest of mine at HHS. I'll just tell one little story when I was there that relates to a company that some of you might know. So the head of devices at FDA wanted to expand the sphere that FDA could regulate. And particularly start regulating for the first time in vitro diagnostic multivariate index assays, which is a fancy way of saying diagnostics on blood tests that test for multiple things. A great example of this, which I just heard of at the time, is 23andMe. So in order to regulate in this space, FDA had to argue that an algorithm, a series of numbers that match up to things, is a medical device. I found that really astonishing. Astonishing that someone could say it with a straight face, and astonishing that someone could claim the ability to shut down companies that were never touching a patient, but only accurately matching algorithms. It was not an issue of the lancet or the container that held the blood. It was merely an issue, really what they were calling a medical device was an algorithm. I managed to put a stop to that, at least while I was there. Another great, probably even better idea is Mike West's idea yesterday, if you were in this panel, of progressive approval. We should reform FDA so that it's approving drugs after their sponsors have demonstrated safety and let people start using them at their own risk, but not much risk of safety, but let's prove efficacy after they've been legalized. And I also really appreciate the work of Casmi and Richard Barker, who have been developing a great model for adaptive licensing. And I really hope that something significant comes out of changing the regulatory environment for the better in the next few years. But even a significant reduction in development time and costs would still mean that drugs are going to be a lot more expensive to develop than software. So our investment paradigm shifts, because then we're talking about the application across the board of the complete removal of age-related diseases. In other words, maybe the solution to Eroom's law isn't just reduction of costs and time. Tens of billions in net present value would still be needed to offset the development of each drug that is successful, both in terms of approval and in terms of economics. However, this paradigm could be looking at product development potential with much higher net present value. Is there a $1 trillion regenerative medicine therapy? One across-the-board solution to atherosclerosis could do it. It could save tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives across the world. It could radically change an immense, difficult disease. It could be a $1 trillion drug. It could be a single transgenic therapy. It's not impossible. And there are probably other potential across-the-board solutions to diseases or clusters of diseases that could be immensely important. In this rejuvenation biospace, we're potentially talking about keeping interventions that can keep everyone healthy, whether they apply to a category of damage or a specific disease. The possibility exists that there will be preventive measures that everyone will have. The solution to expensive development and regulatory costs is to create products with drastically increased financial and social value. And rejuvenation biotechnology could do just that. When I complain that my smartphone's battery only lasts a few hours, my friends say that I'm whining and that I have a first world problem. And they're right. In a larger sense, you can tell a lot about an era by listening to what people whine about. If we invest wisely in life extension technologies, in 40 years, we'll all be able to annoy our friends with complaints like, immortality almost never works. Thank you.